Well, my name is Amanda Burma. I'm a technical marketing engineer with Froglogic. So we'll be going over today automated GUI testing using Froglogic Squish, but with a focus on testing using Squish for Java, so testing against Java applications. So a little bit about Froglogic. We have complete product focus on Squish. So we offer Squish GUI Tester and Squish Cocoa for code coverage. Those are our only tools, so we have complete focus on our tools. And you'll notice that when communicating with Froglogic, that is our focus, and we are there to help you. We're headquartered in Hamburg, Germany, but we do have individuals throughout the US and Europe working for Froglogic. We were established in 2003 and are privately held. Now, we do have a large and growing customer base throughout the world and have been profitable since inception. You can see just a few companies that you may recognize, but we do have over 3,000 companies currently using Squish. Now, I say, is your software ready? Because we can cover various platforms, various technologies, a combination of technologies, a combination of platforms. And as you'll see today, with testing a Java application, you can take the same tests and test those against the different operating systems or platforms that your application works on without making changes to those tests. So that's going to save you a lot of time. And we work at the object level, so we can really see and work with those objects instead of guesswork or finding items via image-based recognition. And we have one question here. Now, Charles, you mentioned a question. You already work with the tool, and you have some doubt about some different requirements with the tool. If you restate or clarify your question a little bit, I may be able to help and also answer that during the presentation, hopefully. And if not, we'll follow up afterwards, and you can always email squish@froglogic.com, and we're happy to help you there as well. Now, Squish is accurate and flexible. Now, why do I say accurate and flexible? Accurate because we hook into the application, we see the object properties, we can really work with those objects and accurately find objects even among changes. Changes that are more drastic, we can quickly and easily make one change to an object map entry, which we'll learn about later, impacting all of your scripts, really helping with maintainability. The flexibility you can see just through our options for record and playback, as well as powerful scripting, scripting in a variety of different scripting languages, as well as across different toolkits, combinations of toolkits, and a number of other features, some of which we'll see today in the presentation. A little bit about the Squish architecture before we get started. We're going to work through some examples in the Squish IDE today, as well as from the command line interface. The Squish IDE is represented here by this inner square. In the Squish IDE, the Squish runner and Squish server are both used to generate test scripts. The Squish runner is connecting to the Squish server, pardon me, also used during execution, and the Squish server is what hooks into the application under test, or you'll hear me call it an AUT. That's what's allowing us to drive and communicate with that application under test, and then the Squish server reports those actions and the positive, negative, or the success or failure of those back to the Squish runner. Now, when you're recording, that's what's generating your test scripts and building your object map. During test script execution, whether you're working from the IDE to simply click execute, or you're working from a command line interface, which we offer a complete command line interface, or a third-party integration that you've either written or we have out of the box, the Squish runner is the primary component there, working with your test scripts and generating your test results. It's communicating across your network to one or more Squish server instances, and that's important. You can have execution simultaneous, overlapping, or individual across these different systems, let's say you have Squish or you have your application installed on a Windows, on a Linux, and on a Mac, and you want to execute those tests simultaneously, you're running a batch of tests and report those results back, not a problem. Very simple setup, and we're going to see some of that today. Now, I mention integrations because in order to really bring your whole process together, Squish is one component of your entire build or application lifecycle process. And we offer a number of different integrations out of the box. And we also share our source code with customers. So you have the ability to write and create your own integration should it not exist. Many people also just use the command line interface, calling then a bash shell or batch script from, let's say, their build tool using our command line interface to bring the whole thing together and integrate the entire process. So I told you, not too many slides. That wasn't bad. It was, let's see, 7 minutes of slides. Try to keep it shorter next time. But let's dive into that demonstration. Again, for those of you who have joined since I began, please do ask questions via the questions area. I will try to answer those questions throughout the demonstration or following the demonstration, which should be done at about 35 or 40 after the hour. I will leave the remaining time till the top of the hour open for question answer, in which I'll read the questions aloud and answer those, often sparking new questions from other participants. So that's actually one of the most valuable aspects of the presentation. Let's minimize this. And what I'm going to do is come over to my Squish IDE. Now, for those of you newer to Squish, some of you may have worked with Squish, some may have not. The Squish IDE is based on Eclipse. You'll see I'm on a Mac right now. We are also going to see tests execute against my Windows box and against a Linux virtual machine that I have running on this machine as well, and you'll see how they all communicate. You'll also see how no matter which operating system you're on, it's going to look the same. So what we have in front of us right now, our test suite. When you first create a test suite, we're going to walk through creating one real quick here. New test suite. You can give that test suite a name. Apologize for having that in there. And we'll say, I'll just call this delete me. That's a great name because we're not going to save that one for too long. Click next. And this is where I can select the scripting language that I would like to use. So for example, today I'll just stick with JavaScript, but you can see a number of options available. So you'll have the power of that scripting language in addition to the power of Squish, in addition to your application's API, all at your fingertips. Now, one of the things you can do is select a specific application that you'd like to focus on testing, or you can switch between applications. Either way, when we work with Squish, if I browse out to the application I'm interested in testing, so I'm going to come out to a sample application. Now, I'm in a sample application that does ship with Squish. So when you open your install of Squish, you'll have this available as well. So what I'm able to do is I can either install it here, or I'm going to come here, select my address book application. In this case, I'm using addressbook.class, and it's attached to that. So it's not attached right now. I've set up the configuration so that I can begin working with it. And by simply coming here and clicking New Test Case and clicking Record, I can begin testing. Now, we know in automated testing, unless someone's told you otherwise, which is a little bit of a fib, that everything's not record and playback. But components are record and playback, and it's an important aspect to have. So any action I perform here, for example, I'll click New, click Add, add in my name. This is not my email address. In case you're wondering, if you do need to get a hold of me, squish@froglogic.com is the best way. And we'll go ahead and click OK. So typically in testing, you perform a few actions and then you often have a desired result. What is the result that you would like? And this particular demonstration, there's a question right now, can you show the demo for our software? This particular demonstration is customized toward a wider audience for individuals joining from all over. It was open to the entire community, or or world. So for any custom demonstrations, please do reach out to sales@froglogic.com, and we're happy to coordinate that. So back to the demonstration here, we have we performed a few actions. You'll notice our control bar here. As I was performing actions, it was giving you little cues or notes letting you know what was happening. We're currently recording. This right here is the little stop button. And now I can also create a verification point. Now we offer many different types of verification points, but I'll click on here. It's returning me back to Squish, where I can use my object picker to select what I'm interested in verifying. So what particular object would I like to verify within this application? Perhaps I want to verify that this particular column contains the proper information I'm expecting. So when I select that object, I can see the object. If it had any child objects, I would be able to see them. I can navigate up the object tree, application object tree. I can refresh and view the entire application object tree. But because I'm interested in this object, that's why I use the object picker there, I can see now the properties of that object. So for example, this object has a text property that's helpful. So I'll check that. And what we can see above is now I'm creating my verification point. I can give that verification point a name and save that as a test case resource or test suite resource. So it's almost like saving a function or a method, something that you can recall and reuse if that's something you'd want to use throughout maybe the same test case or multiple test cases. Or I can simply insert this as lines of script in my script that I'm recording. So we'll give it a name. I'm just going to leave it as verification point 1. I'm verifying the text is equal to surname, and I'll click insert. Now, just to show you the difference between the two, that was an object-based verification point. I'm looking at an object, seeing its properties. We also have the ability to verify screenshots. So you can do image-based comparison with thresholds, and you can black out different areas, negative masks and positive masks. And we're still finding all those objects based on the object properties. And then you can verify an entire table and its contents or add a comment, let's say during your recording, to help you understand where you were in your recording a little bit more. So if I were to create another object-based verification point, probably the most common one, again, coming back, selecting the object picker, and this time, let's say I select an entry in this table. We can see here the object type. We can see its properties. We can see the value. Again, it's text. Okay, is it selected? Let's go with that. Is this object selected at this point in the recording? And here, last time we saved it as a verification point as a test case or test suite resource. This time, I'm going to just save it as a scriptified property verification point. Click insert, and I'll show you the difference when we click stop here. So I've recorded a few actions, and following these actions, let's just click stop. And that's going to show me my script. So what did I do? I started the application. What did I do from there? I activated an item. So this is how we can begin reading the script. These are items from the Squish API. All of this is completely documented in our documentation. Go to doc.froglogic.com, search for the API. We have a complete reference guide, but you'll learn it and really gain that knowledge through recording and working with the tool as well. Activating an item. Okay, you'll see also type, mouse click, things like that. Those are related to your applications API. So you have access to your entire applications API, the Squish API, as well as the scripting language. Now, this wait for object item, we're intelligently waiting for objects. How are we doing that? We incorporate that into any step when we record so that we automatically wait for an object, but we're only waiting until that object appears. However, if that object doesn't appear within 20,000 milliseconds or 20 seconds, that's the default. It's an optional parameter. If it's not specified, as it isn't by default, it's 20,000 milliseconds waiting a maximum of 20 seconds for that object. In the event the object appears before then, the script proceeds. And that's allowing the script to go as fast as possible for your application to handle. However, not too fast for your application. Now, there are cases where you're rendering a lot of data. You may want to wait longer. That's where you can begin incorporating logic, and we'll see some of that later. So we went through, we typed in some information. We can see our first verification point right here. Remember, I mentioned that this was a verification point that I have as a, in this case, test case resource. I can come back to that verification point and visually see the object on which it was performed, and we'll get into the object map shortly, as well as the property, and you can expect failure or not, etc. And I can drag and drop that as a test suite resource so that it's available to all tests in my test suite. Now, the test.compare, that was just a scriptified one, gives you a little more flexibility from the scripting language standpoint, but doesn't give you the visual. Is doing the same thing, except I'm verifying something else here. I'm verifying that this particular entry in that table is selected, is set to true. So if we just run this very quickly here, and as I run things from GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar, it is hard to see that sometimes because it doesn't keep up 100%, but we'll see a number of different scripts play back. So you would be able to see the execution, a number of different examples. Now, one of the questions is, how do I hook into a running application and record scripts within the running application? While we're not going to get into that today, I'm happy to speak to that if we have extra time at the end, and then I can also point you to some examples. Okay, so we created our own test script. We played it back, we recorded it. Let's take a look at a different script here. This script, for example, takes what was a linear test script and refactors this test script so that you can reuse components of the test script. You've divided things out into different functions. And so now things that are repeat, for example, invoking a menu item, going and selecting a menu, and a menu item is something that happens a lot in this application. Why record that over and over or script that over and over when you can have one function that you continuously call, calling from down here? Now I have this all within one test case. What if I want to reuse that within my test suite? Simple. Let's create a test suite resource down here. And in my test suite resources, now depending on if you're using JavaScript or Python or Perl, etc., the syntax slightly varies, but the idea is the same. I now have my invoke menu item function here within this common parameter. And if I go into another script, I can specify, okay, this is a file of interest for me within this script. It's within scripts, and it's called common.js. What does that do for me the way I have this set up? Now when I go to common and click period, I have all of those functions available at my disposal, showing me the parameters, showing me how to execute that. And what that's doing, team collaboration. Create those, share those with your other teammates or yourself to help you remember what some of those parameters are. And then it can simply execute that test. Now you're also able to set breakpoints and step through your script by running a script. So if I, for example, click run here, pardon me, I'm battling a cold, and it pauses at my breakpoint, I'm now able to see all the variables within my script, their values at this point in time. I can see the application object tree and navigate that application object tree just as I did when I was creating the verification point. I can see all of the different properties available. I also have, your typical debugging items, resume, stop, or terminate, step into, step over. So I can step through this one at a time, troubleshooting. And then I also have a console available where I can issue commands to the application, script commands that I would typically have in a script, and see what the output is so that I can begin testing and seeing how does this particular test work or this step work, or will it provide me the output that I want? And then we also have here all the different properties as well as every property. So when you're developing the application, you have your various properties available. These are all available now within the application, within your testing, and you can use them. So again, you have the access to your applications API, you have the access to the Squish API, and to the scripting language. Okay, so we could step through this and it's providing you with the results. Now I'm just simply going to click resume. So what that did is that executed what was a linear script. However, it took, in this case, a TSV file, so a tab separated file, a set of data. Here we can see that data, oops, in my address book. And from that data, you're able to iterate through the data and execute, check your results. So now our results here, we can see, oh, a lot of different verification points. They passed. And then had they failed, that would report a failure as well. Now, all of this output and this execution that I'm doing from the IDE is also available through integrations and from our command line interface. So let's take a look at what that would look like. I'm going to close Squish here. And one of the things I wanted to show you today during the demonstration, let me log into this machine, is how I can take an execution, and let's say I have, in this case, a bash script, and I'm going to use our command line interface to execute a script or set of scripts against my Windows box and against my Linux box here, so that you can see how quickly and easily I can take that same test suite, so this is the test suite we were just working with, and execute it across different environments. No changes. You're creating one set of tests to test across all the different environments your application supports. So I created a little bit more advanced of a test of a script here than you would actually need, but I put in some comments here as to what it does. This is completely independent of Squish. I reuse this a lot, so I have it figure out my path and auto determine that for my Squish runner path. So my Squish runner path is going to be important because that's going to tell this particular script where my Squish runner is located. Depending on the host. So what machine is going to execute these tests? What port or Squish server port is that particular Squish server running on? And it's important to know these Squish runners and Squish servers, those are services running. They're not an actual server. And then we have our test suite. So what test suite do I want to execute? And where do I want to output those reports? So I take all of this information, which I could have put in a single command, but instead, to help make it clearer, I try to divide it up. Makes it more maintainable too. I then call the Squish runner. I specify the host and the port, the test suite I want to execute, and then we also have a parameter called report gen. So I can generate my report. For example, I'm generating it in XML. There's a few different output options, and each integration also contains takes in the reports as well, and then my report path. And from there, I execute a Python script, which is something we ship with that converts our XML output to HTML. You can take that style sheet and modify it any way you want, or come up with your own, and simply opens the report. So what we'll be able to see here is I'm going to execute this. But one of the things that has to happen is that destination machine, that host machine, has to have Squish server running and listening on it. And there's a setting that indicates, hey, what incoming IP addresses or computers or range of IP addresses will you allow to connect to this Squish server? So this does about the same thing here as far as the beginning. But here I'm simply calling the Squish server. So over on my Linux box, I currently have my Squish server running. You can see prior tests I had are showing in the log right there, but my Squish server is running. And when I execute this, you're going to see, let me minimize this here. I'm going to execute this from my Mac terminal, just calling that same file we were looking at. And what it's going to do, oops, I have it running on my Windows box. Just a second here. So in that file, I had different IP addresses specified, right? So back in here, I had this IP address and this one. So I'm just on a small local network, whereas these could be fully qualified domain names, etc. But I have this one specified and that one commented out. This is my Windows box. So what we'll do is I'm going to remote desktop into, that's kind. Let's try this again. There we go. Apparently in this case, 2 times is a charm. So I'm remoting into, this is my Windows box over here. Again, on my Windows box, I have Squish server sitting there and listening. And I also confirmed my IP address ahead of time. Okay, so Squish server's listening, right? So we'll come back and execute what I just executed. And it's running that test. So it's that same test. That test that I ran, one of the items from that test suite, it's actually running the entire test suite now. I could choose to run individual tests or the test suite. But it's running that same exact test. The test suite's actually coming from my Mac, because that's where the file path to that test suite is, executing it against the Windows box. Now, this is something you're not going to see in a lot of tools. You're not going to see the ability to really hook into these objects, look at these objects, if these objects change, etc. How are you going to be able to update those scripts? What changes are you going to have to make? With this, I executed it against Windows. I'm going to execute against my Linux box, and then I'll show you what happens with a small change, how those objects work. So let's go back here, and I'm going to comment these out. So what I just did in doing that is I'm saying, okay, now look at my Linux box and this Squish server port, and I'm just going to run that same exact script. Now, I did a blog entry a few weeks ago that shares a similar example to this. Maybe in Analogous, but I believe just go look at blog.froglogic.com if you're interested in a similar example to this to go over using the command line interface. And the neat thing with the command line interface, okay, I'm keeping it very basic here, but it gives you an understanding of how when you bring all of your different solutions together throughout your application lifecycle, things can work together. Those reports can be taken in by your build tool, by your entire ALM solution, for example, or a homegrown solution. So what are these reports that keep popping up? You can see, well, last night or yesterday, I was testing to make sure everything was ready, and this morning before the call. But so these are all of our different reports, and everything's green, so it passed. Not very fun. I can break things in a few minutes here. But we're able to see, okay, the number of test cases that ran, the number of tests, number of passes, failed, errors, fatals, any warnings that were, if they appeared, and then a summary of each. Now, another blog entry I had out there was how to put value into your reports, because you can really increase the value of your reports, communicate, okay, this says test general and it says all this passed, but what does that mean? So you can check that blog entry out as well to really make your reports more valuable. So if we return back to Squish, well, why don't we do it from here so that you can see that it looks just the same between operating systems. And you may have noticed as I'm browsing through things that you can maintain a number of different Squish editions. If you have a hybrid application, maybe your application is Java plus some native controls or has WebKit included, we support all of that. Squish can then work with all of those different toolkits seamlessly. Now, begin thinking about some questions. I'm going to wrap up with the demo here in the next, let's say less than 5 minutes, and then it'll be time for more questions. Depending on the number of questions, I could also speak to showing hooking into a running application. So, my Linux box. What do I have here? I've got a test suite. Looks just the same. You can tell everything looks the same no matter what operating system I'm on. Now, one of the things we didn't talk about very much today that's very important, I talked about that we're finding objects based on the objects and the object properties, but I didn't show you the object map. So here, this is what we call a symbolic name of an object. That's what it's waiting for in all these different cases. But what is this? If I right click on this symbolic name and select open symbolic name, that's taking us to our object map. You may also hear the term object repository in the industry. But what this is this is an object map that when you record against objects, or if you manually add or edit them yourself, it's populating this object map. And what it's doing is it's collecting and deriving a symbolic name, the name to use in your scripts 90% of the time, I'd say. And then the symbolic name is a lookup to its real name. And its real name is a combination of a minimal set of properties that make that object unique. And this is why when objects change in your application, or if they're dynamic, you can come to one location, one entry, make that change, and all of your tests are updated. It's going to save you a lot of time. One of the battles with automated testing is not only creating and identifying what tests are going to be the most value, it's the maintenance of these tests. And that's where having to only maintain one set of tests across the different operating systems, being able to test across those different operating systems with a single tool even, as well as how we're finding those objects. Whether open changes and isn't always equal to open, but maybe needs a wildcard or regular expression as it's dynamic. Or, for example, it simply changes 100%. You come in and you change it, and then it's changed for your entire script at the real name level, but your script remains untouched. Okay. How to best manage test data with Squish. Can you dynamically create test data? Sure. So let me finish up here and we'll get to the test data question. So with your object map, a few other features that you have that I didn't show in the demonstration, with the application running, so we'll launch the application, you have the ability to check the existence of different objects. So let me make this a little smaller here. Hang on one second. Okay, so we're going to make this a little smaller here. I'm going to, let's close some of these windows so we can take a look at our object map. And with this object map, and you can do this from the spy or spy picker tool as well, but you're able to check the existence of an object. Does this particular object exist in the application? So check its existence, yes. If the object doesn't appear at that time, it'll tell you it doesn't exist. Can I highlight the object? What is the object that I'm selecting? So as you edit these objects, especially if your object has changed over time, the ability to check that the object exists and highlight to make sure that's the actual object you're interested in is also very helpful. I could then go here and browse through, selecting a different object, and it's going to show me that object again in the object tree here. I can copy its real name, its symbolic name, or simply add it to the object map if it doesn't exist. Okay, let's get to some of these questions. So how do you best manage data within Squish? So Squish has a few different ways of managing data. Let's reset my perspective so I can get my windows back here. One of the ways that you saw, let's see, in this particular case was a TSV file. So out here I have a TSV file with data in it. That's one way to do it. You can work with CSV files. You can work with SQL databases, for example. And then if you're using one of the easiest languages to do it in is Python. Python has great modules for reading and writing to data sources. So it just really simplifies everything. It makes it very clean. It's possible in all the other languages. I just personally prefer Python for it. But what you're able to do is connect to those data sources and use your scripting language to your advantage to read and write from those different data sources. So if you want to generate data and write it to a data source, that's one set of calls, right? You're basically making a SQL call to write it out if you're working with a SQL database or similar. Or you have data here, you have data in an external location. By simply specifying the location, for example, you can include a global script which works with it. Global scripts are scripts in the same scripting languages you've chosen for your test suite, but have nothing to do with Squish. They can be completely independent of Squish and do whatever you would like. You can import those and, for example, use those methods if JavaScript I know doesn't have um, the same terminology as I'm using right now, but the same idea, those different functions are then available. So as far as the way to best manage data, if you're talking data-driven testing, would be to either use a TSV file from our test suite resources, use a database, you can use spreadsheets, but reading and writing from them is simply a matter of working with the scripting language and the test suite or the test data source. So yes, you can dynamically create test data. And one of the things I mentioned early on in the slide deck is the flexibility of Squish. There's never just one approach to working with something. So there's many approaches to working with test data. And your scripting language powers a lot of it, as well as the data source. So if you see our knowledge base, there are more examples too. Okay, let's do this. Can different test developers work and contribute to the same object map? Absolutely, that's a great question. A case study was written recently. It was written by Microsoft because a company was doing Java application testing, but they were implementing TFS, Team Foundation Server. They had to make sure all of the collaboration still existed. Now, if I, instead of working from the Squish IDE, which is built on Eclipse, if I work from Eclipse and just use the Squish plugin, it's going to look 100% the same. But what I'm going to have here is version control capabilities. I'm going to be able to check things in, check them out, which is highly recommended. I demo from the direct Squish IDE, but the Eclipse-based one with the add-in has all the same functionality plus more. So they were able to then use TFS because TFS has an integration with Eclipse for version control. Now, as far as the same object map, absolutely. So your test suite, let me go out and show you what your test suite looks like. Your test suite is simply a collection of files. And this is another thing. Our scripts are very portable. And that's also what makes them easy for version control and collaboration. If we come in here and look, this is the test suite that I worked in, a similar one. Has the comp file, which has some settings, the object map here. And that object map, you can open this up in just a text editor if you'd like to see how simple it is. But you'd want a nicer text editor than what I just selected. But it has all the objects in there. So you are able to do diffs between the two to merge, etc. And then your test cases are just the same. Any verification points or shared data there. And then you can open these and you can see, okay, I'm able to see it from here. Version control is easy. And that is another thing that you'll really want to watch for in automated testing is the ability to collaborate, to share the same object map. You can share the same object map across different test suites. If each test suite you've created has, let's say, unique characteristics that you want to focus on, but your object map is global across multiple test suites. You're able to do that as well. It's just a matter of your test suite resources and your preferences and specifying in Squish, not this is your one of the settings, but you can specify where your objects are coming from, what object map to use. Okay. I like to just add in a written comment as well, in addition to what I've said. So consider version control, very important. Eclipse plus Squish plugin with, let's say, your version control tool gives you great collaboration capabilities. Okay. Let's see. Whether the tool worked fine without re-recording if an object position has changed. Absolutely. So let's say an object position changes. Now sometimes I have my my development environment for the particular application up so I can go and just move objects around and compile and then show that to you. But I don't have that with me right now. But what I can show you is, for example, we are not using any coordinates based on where that object is, right? We're using properties to identify how to find that object. So these are the properties. These properties have absolutely nothing to do with where that resides on the page. It has to do with, if it has a hierarchy, what its parent object is. So if that changes, you don't have to re-record anything. Well, if the location changes, you don't have to do anything. But let's say that, let's find a different item. Here's a great one. Unnamed address book. I like to relate this one back to Word. Everyone's worked in Microsoft Word, right? Or whatever the open source one is that you might work in. This contains address book -unnamed, but as soon as I name my address book, this changes. This has a whole set of objects that are not unique to unnamed address book. So what do I want to do here? Incorporate a wildcard, or if I wanted to make sure that this name actually followed a certain format, then I may want to use a regular expression. But by simply doing this, I've now said, okay, anything that has address book space dash space and then whatever text, I can find that. It's not going to matter how that changes. So as far as position changing, no re-recording. However, let's say that you miss a few steps. You recorded and you're like, oh no, I missed a few steps, or actually after I enter in that phone number, but before I click OK, I want to do a verification point. Well, what do? Set a breakpoint, right click, and select record snippet. That's going to run the script right up to your breakpoint and allow you to insert steps at that recording. Well, why do I want to do it from my breakpoint and not just by clicking record right here? Because I want it to be at the same spot. I want that to logically make sense, right? If you're just working with individual functions, you can get away with that, but do set a breakpoint. Play up to the breakpoint and then record from there. One of the things you'll also notice here is sometimes there are coordinates. And what are these coordinates? They are relative coordinates. That's very important. So we're still finding this particular table, if we open the symbolic name, based on these attributes. Okay, so we found that table. However, within that table, I wanted to, or within that table in 3-1, so column 3, row 1, I wanted to click in this particular coordinate. That is a relative coordinate. And what that means is that within this particular table, in this particular cell, I'm clicking on this coordinate with this mouse button. So sometimes those coordinates don't matter. Sometimes they do. Depends on the object, right? So we give you that option. And so for objects where it might matter, we will include it. However, if you're changing resolutions and you are switching around in things in iOS and Android, for example, on different mouse clicks, you may have a control that's wider, but it doesn't matter where you click and when you change resolutions or orientations. So change it to 5, 5. There's guaranteed 5 by 5 pixels in an object, or you're probably not successfully clicking on that object. Or simply remove it. You don't need the coordinate, it'll simply click on that object. But they're there in case you need to click on a specific area. Okay, so if an object changes, position does not impact script, no changes required. Look into topics on regular expressions and wildcards in object map for dynamic or changed objects. Okay, any other questions? The last webinar I gave, I didn't have a voice, so I couldn't record it, but there were so many questions. I think we had over 30 questions, and one sparked another. So I know you guys have questions out there. Use me. You've got 8 more minutes.